Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this budget reminds me of a friend who told me a story of betrayal and deceit. He recalls a night out in a bar where he got a glimpse of what looks like a beautiful woman. Excited, Madam President, my friend decided to take a closer look and went over to say hello, only to find out that when he removed the lipstick, removed the wig and the makeup, it was actually a man. Madam President, this budget is dressed up with makeup, with lipstick, and with a false hair wig to fool the people of St. Lucia. It gives or perceives to give honey, Madam President, but what it really does deliver is vinegar to the stomachs of the people of St. Lucia. Nicely packaged speeches with no substance, purpose, or truth, all intended to mislead, is how I describe this budget. Madam President, despite every effort to mislead the public, as you've heard here today, the Social Economic Review on page 30 cites St. Lucia as the worst performing economy in the OECS. This is while the government tells us that their economic policies are working. Madam President, at 2.2%, St. Lucia is way behind our next door neighbor of St. Vincent, 6%, Dominica, 4.7%, Antigua, 3.9%, Grenada, 3.6%, St. Kitts, 2.3%. All other OECS countries have performed better than St. Lucia in 2023 as far as their economic situation is concerned. Madam President, still on page 11 of the Social and Economic Review, we see in that blue box that the average economic growth in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, it shows us that the average in the Union was 4.2%, or double that of St. Lucia's growth, Madam President. This simply means that St. Lucia in 2023 underperformed and did not meet the great opportunity for growth and for transformation and for delivering new opportunities to people in various sectors, whether it's in education, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in tourism, small businesses, whether it's in the renewable energies. Madam President, our ability was hampered by a T-boutique economic policy instituted by this government. So while the government tells us that things are well and would like us to believe that it's business as usual, we are the worst performing economy in the OECS. Madam President, I want to remain on page 11 in that blue box, and if you look a little deeper, it tells us a lot about consumer prices. And when you look at the column where it talks about inflation for the year 2023, Madam President, you would see that consumer prices in St. Lucia, Madam President, was the second highest in the OECS at 4.1%. Only Antigua, that scored just about 5-point-something%, came in higher than St. Lucia. Madam President, this can be traced to the fact that the government has picked up record levels of taxes, Madam President. Over $1.2 billion were picked up in taxes while the government allowed subsidies on fuel, on school transportation, on LPG cooking gas used by the poorer people in the country to go up and up on the people of this country. And so, Madam President, we see that St. Lucia comes in with the second highest.
I rise on a point of order.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I just heard, I rise on a point of order. And that
what is your point of order, Senator?
The member has grossly misled the House. I just heard him say that St. Lucia collected over $1.2 billion in tax revenue for the fiscal period. Madam President, even before I asked him to provide that information, that's absurd. And I do not think that the member, while he's speaking about the social and economic review, just throws an arbitrary figure out there that has no basis, no evidence, no truth.
And the question is, Leader of Government Business, do you have any information to contradict his utterance?
Madam President, he introduced.
If you can prove that he is misleading with the information that he has provided.
Well, I could address that in my report. But I just wanted to point out at this point that he has misled the House.
Okay, noted.
I will gladly come back with the correct information.
Yes, that would help. Okay.
Madam President, it really is a sad and stark revelation that the leader of government business has just made. Because what he has just done, Madam President, is that he has shown us that he's not aware and educated about the policies and the performance of his own government. Because if he was, Madam President, he would never stand in a point of order. Because what he has just uttered is an absolute untruth. And the current estimates of revenues and expenditure shows that the tax revenue is $1,252,595,000.
Senator Fedee, could you indicate to us what page that you are reading
I'm on
from?
the summary page of the estimates of revenue and expenditure, and it shows you for financial year 2023-2024, Roman numerals 3, and in the estimates, Madam President, you see the projected outturn. It says that this financial year is projected to end with tax revenue being $1,252,595,000.
Madam President, now that you have acknowledged me, I rise on a point of order.
Yes, Senator.
Now that Senator Fedee has properly quoted the document, which is now the estimates of revenue, it confirms what I said. He has now read from the estimates to indicate that it is a projection. But he had instead earlier stated that we had collected 1.2 billion. So now, Madam President, from his own evidence, from the source, it is true that this statement that we had collected 1.2 billion is untrue. And I think he has to withdraw it because the estimates of expenditure that he just read from as a projection.
What? Senate, thank you, Senator. Senator Fedee, I wish to note that is what you read, that it is a projection. However, your statement said that is what was collected. I leave that to you to please correct your statement, your previous statement.
Noted, Madam President. But, Madam President, I want to ask the leader of government business, who's challenging the government's own budget,
Senator Fedee,
to provide me with evidence to show that the projection outlaid by the Ministry of Finance is bizarre. This is the point.
Okay, Senator Fedee, let's retract. Senators. Let us put this in context. Senator stood on a point of order and disputed what you indicated. Okay? I asked him for the evidence. He could not provide it on hand. However, You're quoting from a document, you gave the page. However, what you have just read is different to what you had uttered previously. So I want you to indicate to me, which statement are you standing by? Is it the one that you're reading, or is it your former utterance that the government collected? Is it the projection or what was collected? I need you to qualify this statement. Correct it. What is for the record? I need to hear.
Madam President, I thank you for your intervention. The government has brought a budget, laid it in the House for the opposition, and the government says that we project to collect $1.25 billion. And the government is now backing away from that number, and you're asking the opposition to confirm those numbers?
Revenue performance.
Where is it? Where? There.
The central government's revenue when this is trended upward for the fourth consecutive year to $1.4 billion.
Yeah. Now,
Senator, Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I will not sit here in this chamber as leader of government business and allow Senator Fedee to try to manipulate his way with an untruth. Madam President, I rise again on a point of order.
What is the point of order?
My point of order is that Senator Fedee is attempting to mislead the House again. Senator Fedee was quoting from a blue box on the social, page 12 of the Social and Economic Review, and made the statement.
Page 12 or page 11?
Page 11. And
He did say page 11.
Yes, page 11. Continuously mentioned the blue box and made a very clear statement in this chamber that this government had collected in the past tense $1.2 billion of revenue. I stood on a point of order, Madam President, and I said that was not true. He then moved to the estimates of expenditure, which is a different document. And he has read to us that the government projects to collect. But he's attempting to use projects to collect and collected interchangeably. Madam President, that is grossly untrue and misleading. The senator needs to tell the chamber whether the government has collected or intends or projects to collect. And if he continues to say that the government has collected, Madam President, this would be a gross misrepresentation of the facts. And I cannot sit here, we cannot allow the senator to get away with that.
Thank you, Leader of Government Business. Senator Fedee, I beg to agree, though a little bit distracted at the moment. This is what I asked you to qualify in your presentation. Whether it was that the government projected this projection, or is it that in the past the government has collected? Which one is it? And you stick to whichever one you're standing by, and let's see how you move forward. So, which one is it, Senator Fedee?
Madam President, I thank you for your very kind intervention. Now, the government has laid two documents in the House. In the estimates, the government has said to us, the opposition, that it projects to collect $1.2 billion, right? Now, and the estimates normally run with the financial year. If I went with the Economic and Social Review, which is on a calendar year basis, the number is going to be a different number at $1.4 billion. So what does the government want me to use? In the calendar year, the government says that on page 55, please go there with me. Page 55 of the Economic and Social Review, the same one that we have. It's not my fault that the government doesn't read its own reports. So where are you reading from? They don't study to come to prepare for the debate. Page 55.
Revenue performance.
Revenue performance of the government. And I read, Madam President, it says, the central government's revenue and grant receipts trended upward for the third consecutive year to a high of $1,4 427,800,000. That's what that is.
In the year.
1,000 in the year 2023, 2024. So which one would you like me to use? They're both above $1.2 billion. And so I sit here in amazement to hear the government side say that I am trying to mislead them with their own information. You presented this information to us.
Well,
these are your documents that we're reading. You go in a calendar year in the social economic review, it's 1.4 billion. You go in the own projections. I didn't make the projections. You did.
Senator
you
Jean?
project that you are going to have a projection of $1.2 billion.
Okay. Senator Jean?
Thank you, Madam President. I stand on a point of order.
What is your point of order, Senator Jean?
Madam President, I am confused by the presentation of the senator on the other side, and I believe it appears to be misleading to the House. Madam President, the senator continues to reference a $1.2 million, $2 billion, which is not recorded in the estimates of expenditure. Now that he has turned to the Economic and Social Review for 2023 and cited page 55, he is reading 1.4 billion. So he needs to present the correct figures so that he does not mislead. The estimates of expenditure, Madam President, projects, it says, recurrent revenue is projected to decline by 2.7% below the approved estimate, for the fiscal year 2023-24, and it references a 1.376 billion. There is not a reference of 1.2, so he needs to tell us where he's getting his 1.2 from and stick to the documents that he is referencing.
Okay. Senators, I think Senator Fedee in his first situation, he mentioned summary page, Roman numeral 3. That's when his first utterance. Then he moved on to page 55 of the Social and Economic Review. My advice, Senator Fedee, when you want to refer to the estimates, you refer to the page and you speak to that. When you want to refer to Social and Economic Review, you refer to the page and you speak to that. I think that could clear up the matter, jumping between one and the other interchangeably. Stick to estimates, the page, and speak to that. Then if you go to Social and Economic Review, you speak to that and see what you have to say, and we move on. Okay?
Well said,
Madam President, a point of order.
You sit and I acknowledge you first.
Thank you.
Senator Jean?
No. Yes, Madam President, again,
you are standing
on a point of order.
And what is your point of order, Senator Jean?
Senator Fedee, reference page Roman numeral 3.
Yes.
And I would like to point out that the 1.2 billion that is referenced there is with respect to the year 2022-2023.
No.
What he is not referencing, so that's when we were in the financial year 23-24. So what he's referencing is 2 years prior. So he needs to use the figures and put them in the proper context.
What say you, Senator Fedee? Senator Jean has indicated.
Madam President, I'm referencing 2023. Please let the senator know. And it's on
You don't instruct me. Come and take your book, please.
Yeah.
And don't let that happen to you.
No, assuring my...
Senator Fedee, Senator Jean. Senator Fedee has indicated that he's referencing the top. Look at the top of the page, 2023-2024. Have you seen this, Senator Jean? You've seen this? Okay. Can we move on now? Okay.
So, Madam President,
we are moving on. Yes, just move on.
I am moving on. I'm moving on. So, Madam President, look, the issue and the confusion has come because the government side simply did not prepare for this debate. And because they haven't prepared, they are confused by their own numbers. Clearly, Roman numerals 3 in the estimates of 2023-2024 has quoted tax revenue to be at $1,252,595,443. If we went by the calendar year, it says, Madam President, that in the calendar year, the central government's revenue and grant receipts trended upward for the third consecutive year to a high of $1.4 billion to $1.4 billion. Madam President, this tells me, and the point maintains, that the government has allowed inflation prices to go up, making it, Madam President, the second highest consumer prices where cost of living has gone up on the people of St. Lucia. Madam President, the same blue box, I'm going back to the blue box, in the Economic and Social Review, St. Lucia recorded the third highest ratio in the sub-region in the debt to GDP ratio. Now, what's confusing here, Madam President, is that in the blue box, it records the debt to GDP ratio at 74.4%. But that's in the blue box on page 11 of the Economic and Social Review. But however, later down in the same document, it cites the debt to GDP ratio at 72.9. I don't know which is the correct one, and so the government side must clarify the information that they are presented to us, because in the ECCB table, it says 74.4 as our debt to GDP, but later on in the Economic and Social Review, on another page when it talks about under the central government debt, it says 72.9. So, Madam President, I will go with the blue box based on what it says. And the comparison that it has right now, it says, Madam President, that St. Lucia is the third highest in terms of the debt to GDP situation in the Eastern Caribbean. So we have the worst or the slowest growing economy. We are among the highest in inflation prices, coming in second. And then we have the third highest debt to GDP ratio in comparison to the rest of the Caribbean countries. Madam President, so prudential limits is set to be 60%. And that is supposedly an acceptable level, as economists in most countries in the world have suggested that if you are at 60% in your debt to GDP ratio, it means that only in exceptional circumstances should you be there. These exceptional circumstances would include things like pandemics, would include things like hurricanes, natural disasters, financial crises, and other exogenous shocks that can impact on an economy. Madam President, based on the stats that the government side has presented here today, we are, if I go by the blue box, 14% higher than prudential limits. If I go by the number that is mentioned in the paragraph, and I will get to that later, on the central debt management, we would be almost 13% in terms of our prudential limits. So our debt is unsustainably high despite all of the commotion, all of the statements by the government that they are managing the debt situation of the country well. Madam President, I want to get to the productive sectors. Agriculture has been spoken about much here today, but I want to dig deeper into the numbers Madam President, for the agricultural sector, because I come from a farming constituency, and I want to do justice to the farming situation in the country. And as I read the Economic and Social Review, I was very, very shocked, Madam President, to have seen how in this various subsectors, some have recorded historic levels of extremely low output. Madam President, it reads in the Economic and Social Review that agriculture output contracted by 17% in 2023. Banana production, a historic low of 3,593.4 tons. Madam President, this is the lowest in the history of banana production in the country that the country has ever recorded anywhere. And this, Madam President, cannot be good news for the farmers. It says that to the UK, the government exported only 8.4 tons. 8.4 tons exported to the UK. That's a total disaster, Madam President. And so when the government comes into the House and tells us that they are doing well, Madam President, we say that they are coming here with betrayal and deceit, Madam President. Madam President, the non-banana crops purchases by hotels decreased by 15%, Madam President, to 2,878. And that's a very, 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 very worrisome statistic. Because here the government says that they would like to reduce the food import bill by 25%. Madam President, I do not trust this government with anything they say. I will not trust them to recover the industry by 25 bunches of bananas, much less to reduce the food import bill by 25%. Madam President, their management of the sector is appallingly low and appallingly bad that I cannot, Madam President, in any good conscience, attach any level of confidence to any projections they make today, or any promises that they make today, or any purpose statement or policy statement that they make in agriculture. Because, Madam President, the sector has recorded historic lows. This is the worst the agriculture industry has been in the history in terms of its output. And I didn't say that. The Economic and Social Review said that. Madam President, livestock. We go to livestock. The livestock industry on page 14, Madam President, it has declined by 8.4%. Chicken and pork production combined, 17.3% decline, Madam President. So we see that both bananas, non-banana crops, and livestock have all had an experience precipitous decline. Madam President, in the fishery sector, on page 14, the volume declined by 4%, Madam President, to 1,376 tons. Decline everywhere in the agriculture sector. And Madam President, this doesn't make for good reading. I don't think that we are here to celebrate or to gloat over this fact. But what we want to do, Madam President, is for the government to pay more attention to those issues that are important to our farmers, to those issues, Madam President, that are going to help our farming community to rebound and rebound strongly. Madam President, we want this government to pay and place the same level of energy they place on vilifying the opposition and criticizing the leader of the opposition and going on the radio and being vindictive to individuals and all of these personal attacks that they engage in. We want them to place that same level of energy and priority to the agriculture sector so that we can rebuild the sector, Madam President. I go to tourism, and I felt very sorry for the leader of government business today because he struggled hard. He had to go and to pick that in the month of March we've done the best. So he picked a month. In the month of March, this is the best we've ever had. And I felt and I say, wow, it is true what they say, Madam President. A drowning man clutches at straws. Madam President, we have some real challenges within the tourism sector. And there are no challenges that I would wish on any government. And I attempt not to make a political statement here today on the tourism sector, but I attempt to make a statement, Madam President, out of concern for the very debilitating issues that are affecting the industry right now. And so we can have these back and forth arguments among ourselves as to what really ought to be done. And so when we try and flash a mirror in people's faces, when we try to put on makeup on a pig, or we try to put lipstick, the pig is still a pig if you put lipstick and makeup on that pig. And so, Madam President, the real truth of the matter is that while 11 destinations, and this is, I want to read from the CTO, they put out a report, and they said this: while 11 destinations in the Caribbean.
Senator, yes, would you give us a little bit information about the report?
Yeah, this
what
is
year?
a report at a press conference from a regional media reporting on the CTO's report.
What year? What, this year?
So this was 2023. Yeah?
Okay.
But
and you have 15.
this was actually done on March 16, 2024. But it captures the calendar period of 2023. I'm happy to make this a document of the House.
Okay. And you have 15 minutes remaining.
And so, Madam President, it says that while the 11 destinations in the Caribbean, imagine this, Madam President, Anguilla has gone back to its COVID-19 numbers. Guyana, that's not really into tourism, went back to its COVID-19 numbers. Aruba, Curacao, Dominican Republic, Grenada, Madam President, Turks and Caicos Islands, US Virgin Islands, all of them performed better than they did in 2019, which is before the pandemic crushed the industry. And it said, Madam President, that the Caribbean recorded a 4.3% growth in arrival numbers, making it one of the best performing regions in the world in terms of its recovery from COVID. What did St. Lucia do? Well, in this report, Madam President, from the St. Lucia Tourism Authority as of December 2023, it says that St. Lucia grew by 7%, which is half of the level of growth that took place within the tourism industry in the Caribbean, which puts St. Lucia among the bottom performers of tourism recovery in the Caribbean, according to the CTO. The Economic and Social Review, Madam President, also said a lot about tourism. And in the Economic and Social Review, I shall give you the exact page, it said to us that tourism has recovered strongly, but tourism, Madam President, is still below, 20% below, almost 20%. It says 80.9% of where it was in 2019. So that will be 19.1% below where it was in the year 2019. And that is found in the Economic and Social Review on page 12, Madam President. And members can go there and read that paragraph. In the second paragraph, it says so clearly, where the arrival numbers have not rebounded. So I felt sorry for the leader of government business when he was struggling to pull out a month to say, boy, this was the best month. Because really and truly, when you take an overall snapshot of the sector, you see that they are pressure. You talk to taxi drivers. As of this month, the pressure is starting because the winter season, Madam President, has basically beginning to taper off. And people are now going to deal with the traditional seasonality. So he's going to come and talk about jazz and talk about carnival and all that stuff. That's for a couple of weeks. But we've got people who have invested money, taxi drivers who've got loans to pay for 52 weeks in the year. What happens when the jazz festival is finished? What happens when carnival is over? What happens to these people's investments, their businesses? What about the people that we're encouraging to get into Airbnbs, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest in this sector? It is important, Madam President, that we make the proper pronouncements on the development of the tourism industry so that people who are listening for policy guides from the government can get truthful information as it pertains to that. But if the government members don't even take the time to study the Economic and Social Review, and when you quote the Economic and Social Review, Madam President, they say to you that you are presenting voodoo to the House. And so, Madam President, you see, this is a very sad situation that we have found ourselves in that the country and the planners of the country, the Ministry of Finance, put together a really good document. And they have taken their time and they have outlined very clearly the challenges, the strengths, the opportunities, and the weaknesses that are affecting our social and our economic sectors. And so what we have to do, Madam President, is to be guided in a very empirical way, not to try to come and to make all of these allegations that are not true. I was accused a while ago of trying to mislead the House. Why would I want to do that, right? I'm not trying to mislead the House. I am using the documents that you have provided. And so, Madam President, the recovery was driven by the Canadian and the Caribbean markets. Both produce shorter stays and lower average daily rates, says the Economic and Social Review, and it's also quoted in the SLTA report, because it says that the bed nights have actually went down by 2.5 million less bed nights, Madam President, which is quite significant. Here is a very interesting development in tourism that the leader of government business has not touched on. Madam President, while the industry says that stayover arrivals or hotel guests would have grown by 6.9%, it says, Madam President, that hotels and restaurants only yielded a 1.2 increase in revenue. So why is that so? Why is it that there is higher growth but lower revenue yield? That's very interesting. If you are in business and you had 7% more customers coming into your business, then it would be good to assume that you're going to grow by about 7%. But no, Madam President, the answer is found in the markets that have driven the growth. So if we look at the Caribbean market, shorter stays, which accounted for the 2.5 million less bed nights. If we look at the Canadian market, Madam President, price sensitive, which really does impact the level of revenue that has come into the country. So we see, Madam President, when this government tells us that everything is good and great with tourism, we have to take it with a pinch of salt. They are misleading us. Madam President, the construction page on page 13, construction. In the Economic and Social Review, it writes shockingly, Madam President, and I quote directly. It says, after contracting marginally in 2022, real value added in the construction sector is estimated to have increased by 19.2% in 2023. Construction boosted by ongoing and new projects to both the private and public sector, supported by a reduction in prices in some building materials.
Senator Jean.
I stand on a point of order, Madam President.
What's the point of order?
Madam President, the Senator is quoting page 30 of the Economic and Social Review.
13.
1-3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
13, 1-3.
Madam President, I really believe that the strategy of the Labour Party government is to silence me today, you know. For the amount of times I've been interrupted, why are they afraid of the truth, Madam President? Why are they afraid of debating their own budget, Madam President? I cannot understand the amount of times that I have been interrupted on their own facts and even quoting. But Madam President, we're moving on. Madam President, it says that construction boosted on ongoing and new projects in the private and public sector. If you were following, you would never quote page 30. Supported by a reduction in the prices in some building materials. In the private sector, construction works on major projects, mostly investments in hotel plants, picked up pace during the year, including an acceleration of works on the following projects. But here are the projects. Listen to me, Senator. They quoted the Marriott Hotel at Point Seraphin, Madam President. They told the people of St. Lucia that Alan Chasney and his administration never built a hotel in St. Lucia. I want them to answer today, Madam President, who started and initiated the Marriott Hotel in the Point Seraphin facility. Right. Madam President, Dreams and Zurich Resort in Miku, started by the Alan Chasney administration, a leftover UWP project. In addition, Madam President, works were undertaken on the Cabot St. Lucia property to complete the golf course and commence construction on some villas. Who started and initiated the Cabot project? Madam President, it is alarming that the Economic and Social Review, had it not been for construction, for these projects, that the Economic and Social Review would have cited, Madam President, a further contraction within the private sector. We would have seen a decline like we have seen in agriculture, like we've seen in tourism, like we've seen in the debt, like we've seen in the economic growth. We would have seen a decline in construction as well. And so the mastery of the Alan Chasney economic policies has saved this government, has saved you. Now you have something to report. You would have never had anything to report. Now, we go on. It goes on to say commercial construction of the Orange Grove Plaza, a project that this administration said that was structurally unsound. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
During the 2011 election, it is unsound. Why did Flabo buy that building? That building is not good. Look at the building today, Madam President. Look at the building today. And today, this is the only thing you've got to put in your report, because if you didn't have these projects, you would have nothing to report as far as public sector investments are concerned. So don't come and tell us that people are excited and there's so many things going on and there are hotel investments here and there's hotel investments there. No, these are projects that we've left for you, and one day you should say thank you to the United Workers' Party administration. And stop fooling the people of this country. Now, Madam President, it goes on to mention, even in the public sector, Madam President, public sector, right, the major projects that it mentioned, it says DVRP projects, and there are a number of them that I can cite, Madam President, including the road, the Vanna road to go to Ancillary, Madam President, the Millennium Highway and the West Coast Road project. I heard the Prime Minister trying to make another point. But you know, when people are trying to make points and to try to blame somebody else, and this is what he said in his budget address. He said that the Millennium Highway West Coast Road project was already financed, designed, and tendered by the former United Workers' Party administration. But what he wanted to do in saying that was to say that there are some cost overruns of some percent. But what the point is, and the point remains, is that had it not been for the Alan Chasney's administration, you all would not have had nothing to report of but the T-boutique items that you have come here to report. Nothing major for the development of this country. Nothing that can spur economic growth. Not one of your projects can make the assessment of the Ministry of Finance because they've dismissed all your projects as puppy show.
Senator Fedee, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. So if your projects were so good that in the estimation of the Ministry of Finance that they were going to make some revolutionary changes in this economy, they would have mentioned your projects, but they didn't mention any of them. They're all here in the review period 2023, and there's nothing wrong with that. Madam President, I want to move on quickly to public debt. My colleague spoke a lot about it. I will not rehash that information, but I want to do something struck me today, and I'm going to make this point very quickly. And what I'm going to make quickly, Madam President, is that in the last 10 years, if you go to page 129, table 36, Madam President, of your economic and social review, in the last 10 years, the highest amount of debt in any given calendar year is $388.4 million borrowed in the calendar year of 2023, according to our economic and social review. This is borrowed without COVID. This is borrowed without any financial crisis. This is borrowed to respond to no natural disaster. But you have borrowed the most money in any given financial year. Debt, Madam President, has increased by 16%. 16%, Madam President, while they have collected significant levels of tax revenue. In the calendar year, 1.4 billion. In the financial year, their own projections suggest, and if they say that I am wrong, then they are wrong, because they gave us the numbers, we didn't project those numbers. So the 1.2 billion that we're talking about came from you, and you have borrowed the most money. I want to show you fiscal management. Madam President, this is Alan Chasney as Finance Minister. As Finance Minister, Alan Chasney did this. Official debt in 2016 increased by 105 million. Official debt in 2018 increased by 129 million. Official debt in 2019 increased by 113 million. Madam President, COVID happened. The IMF said that countries need to borrow to reduce poverty and increase the recovery in their countries. And guess what, Madam President? This is what happened. We borrowed 356 million and 361 in the COVID years. But this administration has, in the best of economic times, they have borrowed more, historically higher numbers than we have ever had. Madam President, I quickly want to say this about the CIP. The government of St. Lucia would like the people to believe that we don't want them to build schools and roads and health centers. This is all ridiculous. This is all ludicrous. Madam President, they have picked up over $100 million, well over that, in CIP since coming into office, right? And they have not built a single road, a single school, a single community center. They have, what did we build? I'm happy to answer that question. What did the United Workers' Party build? Madam President, in the year 2016 to 2017, this is what we did with the CIP money. $24 million were collected. We did the St. Jude's reconstruction. We did the marketing project, furniture and equipment for the National Hospital at Owen King EU. Madam President, here is what we did in the year 2017-2018. National Initiative to Create Employment. Nice, we give $4 million. Commissioning of the Babonneau Fire Station, $1.9 million. Capital contingency, $5 million. Reconstruction, rehabilitation of secondary and tertiary roads, $2 million. Community infrastructure development, Christmas stimulus.
We need the source
we
of
have
the
banana
document.
productivity improvement project. We didn't leave the banana farmers, Madam President, out in the cold. We funded them, Madam President, and came to their rescue when they needed us with the CIP monies. You all have not done anything. Nobody believe that you all will do anything with the new monies that you're collecting from the CIP. Report and make the returns from the industry that much more transparent than you're doing. And there's a reason why you don't want to sign the memorandum of agreement. They don't want to sign the agreement, Madam President, because they are addicted to money. It's all about the money for the St. Lucia Labour Party. And so, Madam President, they don't care about the fact that people are going to lose their visa-free access. They don't care about the fact that people traveling to Martinique for medical bills and for medical reasons, and students that need to travel around the world. You believe that because it is just the EU that right now is contemplating to put visa restrictions on those countries that have CBI programs that they are not satisfied with. This decision by the government not to sign the memorandum of agreement flies in the face of good cooperation that we've had with the European Union over the years. And so by making sure that we sign that agreement, what we in fact do is to sustain the visa-free access that many people have had, Madam President, in the CIP, in our country for many, many years. I see them mention Henley and Partners.
Senator Fedee, I'm sorry, your time is
Thank you.
up. And before, can you make this a document of the House, please?
I certainly can.
Okay, thank you. Senator Antoine.